Legend Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering the Skaven unit roster. We did the Lizardman one yesterday, and that was really well received. I made a couple of mistakes in regard to the Ark of Sotek Bastillodon. It's actually a tier 3 unit, and there was, I think, another mistake in there somewhere. But apart from that, you guys more or less agreed with what I was saying. So that was good, because I was a little bit unsure about that. But every now and again, because there's a lot in these games, I will make a mistake, and it's totally fine if you point them out. Anyway, so we're covering the Skaven today. Now, I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with the Skaven, in that I used to absolutely hate them. I used to think they were such a weak race when the game first came out, and funnily enough now, they've gone from being my most hated race to now they're my favorite race in the game, because they're just so much fun to play, and I think that they're super strong. I don't think that they are the strongest race in the game. I reserve that for the Dark Elves and High Elves, but they're definitely my favorite in terms of fun. Now, the thing about the Skaven is that they've got a very lopsided roster. Most of their units are either going to be classified as Doomstack or A, or C, or trash. There's going to be a lot in those categories. It's not going to be evenly spread out at all, because there's effective units in the Skaven roster, and then there's really ineffective units in the Skaven roster. Now, just like in the previous ones, this is based off Legendary difficulty campaign, very hard battle difficulty, no mods, no multiplayer. Your experience of these units might be different from mine. That's totally fine. If you've got a different opinion on some of these ones, feel free to let me know. Like I said, I was wrong about some of the placements yesterday, in terms of like the Ark of Sotek being a tier 2 when it's actually a tier 3 unit because it requires a secondary building. Do feel free to correct me, that's fine. That's actually quite useful, because that's how I get better as well. Alright, so just like before, we're going to organize things within melee infantry first, then missile infantry, then monsters, and then finally artillery. Alright, starting with melee infantry. Here's where things get pretty negative, because the Skaven melee infantry are not good. This is a low leadership, high number race in a game that doesn't necessarily favor those kind of engagements. So, starting with the Skaven slaves, these are tier 0 units, so you can recruit them anywhere, but they're really unreliable. They have virtually no killing power, they're terrible in auto resolve. You're just not going to get anything out of this. There's virtually nothing in the game that these guys can beat in melee. The only thing you use them for is for cannon fodder, which is their primary purpose. Use them for cannon fodder, and use them as warp bomb targets. That's about it. If that's what you need them for, then that's fine, recruit them for that, but I wouldn't use them to try to actually dish out damage to the enemy. You will find that they'll rout way too quickly. They cause huge problems for your armies. And they used to be a lot cheaper, so I probably would have put them at C tier like a couple of months ago, but since they got nerfed, where their upkeep cost went up, they made getting these units really ineffective, so I don't rely on them at all. For tier 0, I would highly recommend Skaven Slave Slingers over them, but we'll get to that later. Then we move on to the Clan Rats. Now, there's a lot of redundancy in the Skaven roster, especially in their melee infantry. There are 4 Clan Rat units. So we got the regular Clan Rats with spears and shields, and then regular ones with just shields. So all of these Clan Rats are trash. But Legend, they're better than Skaven Slaves. Yes, their stats are better than Skaven Slaves, but also their upkeep cost is higher than Skaven Slaves, and they also require a military building. Now, while I definitely do build that military building to get chieftains, I definitely don't get it to get Clan Rats. These are incredibly unreliable, very difficult to get these units to actually deliver their value in any given battle, because their low leadership will get them running, their low combat stats will have them not actually dish out any damage. Again, they perform the exact same role as the Skaven Slave, in that you use them as cannon fodder, which is probably what they're thematically supposed to do, but you have better choices as Skaven. So if you're going to use cannon fodder, you've got things such as summons and menace belows, and there's so many things that you can do where you don't have to actually waste a unit slot in your army. So while having cannon fodder can be very effective, my recommendation is not to put these in your standing army, because they're not good. It's very difficult to make them do what they need to do, which is actually dish out damage to win the battle. That's how you win fights as any race in this game. Alright, and then the next up are Storm Vermin. Now, Storm Vermin I've said a lot of things about Storm Vermin over the years, but truly, Storm Vermin are an excellent unit. Just absolutely fantastic. You know, I know they're not. They're terrible. They got to go down here. Because Storm Vermin are armored Skaven slaves. They're absolute trash. Tier 3 units that take 2 turns to recruit, at least until you get Queek. They've got a lot of armor, which isn't really that useful to them when they route really easily. They've got low combat stats, high entity numbers, they get in the way, they're kind of slow. These are very bad combatants for the Skaven. Using a traditional style army as a Skaven is a really poor choice. You can do it, but it is really ineffective. Trying to get these units to deliver value on very high battle difficulty is always going to be an uphill battle. The only time that these kind of units are useful is in siege defenses. And the thing is, your garrisons are already provided with tons of these units. And they're actually quite effective for just holding the walls, relatively so, especially because inside of forts, they get an extra leadership buff, so they actually hold reasonably well. But if you're out in the field, these guys here route way too quickly, making them just so ineffective, because Skaven naturally have lower leadership as a base point than other races. But when you play on very hard battle difficulty, you get an immediate -4 penalty. So units that have low leadership are going to be affected disproportionately on that compared to high leadership units. Like if you take a unit of, say, Phoenix Guard, for example, from the High Elves, and you take off -4 leadership, well, that unit is still more or less going to fight to the death. But if you have a unit that's got like 30 leadership and you take off -4, that unit is going to take one look at an enemy and run away. It does make a big difference, the very hard penalty on lower tier units. It disproportionately affects them. And unfortunately, even these guys here, being the elite Skaven unit, they perform like a tier 1 unit. So their price point and their value is extremely low, not recommended. Then we have the Plague Monks. We got the regular ones and the Censer Bearers. These are trash, because while they're a little bit more damage dealing than, say, Storm Vermin, they are really unreliable, because any sort of melee infantry engagement, you're always going to be fighting an uphill battle. The Skaven simply have better choices. Now, if you're going to go melee infantry, this is where I'm going to talk about some actual positive stuff. We've got the Death Runners and the Eshin Triads. Now, Death Runners are C tier, and Eshin Triads are also C tier. The reason for this is that if you like melee infantry, I would recommend going with these two units here. It's still not optimal for the Skaven. They have far better choices, but the reason these are C tier is primarily because of Stalk. If you're going to play a Skaven, you need to play as Skaven, and they work really well as ambushes. So these guys here not having Stalk gives them a huge disadvantage here, even if they had higher stats. Stalk is really useful for getting the enemy to separate their forces up into smaller groups, and then you get your stalking units to just dogpile on them. And because both of these units have high armor piercing, and these ones here being anti-infantry and the Eshin Triads being anti-large, you can essentially pick apart any kind of enemy bit at a time with this kind of stuff, as long as they're not massively overpowering you, and not too quickly, like they're not too fast, otherwise they'll get to you before you finish them off. So against early game greenskins and against early game dwarfs, or even early game empire, these guys here can deliver you a lot of value if you use them correctly, and they're very good in an ambushing situation. So these guys here work well within the campaign mechanics of the Skaven, and these guys here do not. They're not inconvenient to recruit because they come from the assassin building, which I do get assassins, so I usually build them. So not an inconvenient unit. Actually, I think that one comes from the infantry building, but I do build that to get to what's it called, the chieftain. So it's none of these units are necessarily inconvenient to recruit, except for the Storm Vermin being 2 turns to recruit. I think the Censer Bearers might also be 2 turns. But yeah, the Death Runners and the Eshin Triads, they're okay. You can make them work. Then we've got the last one for the melee infantry, we've got the Warp Grinders. Now I'm going to put the Warp Grinders as a B tier because they're classified as a melee infantry unit, and they're awful at being a melee infantry unit. They're terrible in melee, but they've got some special abilities. The Warp Quake stuff, being able to stop enemy units around them, that can be useful, especially against cavalry, stop them from cycle charging. Using them in conjunction with the Eshin Triads can be quite good. and they've got that ability that causes damage around them to everyone, and if in a big blob that can do a lot of damage, and they're also very useful in a siege. You do have better options, which is why they're not going up any further, and they're also very good in Clan Scryer, but I think they deserve no higher or lower than B tier. So that's all the melee infantry. It's very it's not good looking for the Skaven so far, but this is honestly all of their worst troops. Okay, now we move on to missile infantry. So we've got Skaven slave slings here. I would have a couple of months ago put them as B tier, but they since took a little bit of a nerf in that their upkeep cost went up quite significantly. So I'm now going to put them at C tier. There's a different unit that I would prefer to use now as opposed to Skaven slave slings. I used to like spam these guys like crazy in the early game, but I don't really do that so much anymore just because they've received such a significant nerf. Sometimes it feels like Creative Assembly specifically nerfs my playstyle over and over and over again, which is fine. You just find ways to work around it. And as they do that, other units become more effective. So the reason why that a Skaven Slave Slinger performs better than their other counterparts is largely because at least they've got a missile attack, so they can dish out some damage without having to receive damage in return. But they have relatively low range. They've got loads of ammunition, low damage. Tricky unit to use effectively against late game armies, but you could do okay. You can get your value out of them, so you can, if you're good, you can manage. Okay, then we've got, I think this is the Night Runner here. Now the Night Runner is the unit that I would say is actually my sort of go-to replacement over the Skaven Slave Slinger. They're not overly expensive. I think this is a tier 2 unit. Let me just confirm that. If we have a look over here, recruited from the Assassin building chain. Oh no, the Death Runners are in the Assassin chain, my mistake. The Night Runners, yeah, they're a tier 2 unit, so you can get them really quite early. Like, it's not difficult at all to get to tier 2 as Skaven, right? Just wanted to double check that. And the great thing about this is a low range missile unit that's okay in melee. It's not terrible, but they can fire while moving, which is really useful in the early game, especially as lots of melee infantry are chasing after you. And because they're quite fast, they don't stalk though. These are actually quite good at sniping enemy generals, especially if they're on horseback, because, you know, bigger target makes them easier to kill. Not a terrible unit, not an amazing one, but for a tier 2 unit, I think that they're quite good. Alright, then let's talk about, okay, there's like loads of different gutter runners here. So let me just try to get these organized. So we've got the poison variants. So we've got, how many gutter runner types are there? I think there's 5 different gutter runners. Let me just check. I think there's 5 different gutter runners. So let's see. No, you got Night Runner Sling, so that's a different variation of that Night Runner. And then there's 4 different types of gutter runners. Okay. Which can be a bit confusing since all their unit cards look pretty damn similar. Okay, so this one here is actually the Night Runner with slings. I'm actually going to put that at C tier because they don't fire while moving, which is really important. Even though they do have longer range, the increased upkeep cost opposed to Skaven Slave Slingers, but they're actually better at being a slinger. I just think that being able to move while shooting is really valuable for the Skaven, since speed is one of their big advantages. Alright, now that there's 4 variants of Skaven, what's this, gutter runners. Now we've got the regular gutter runners, and then there's like a poison variant, and then there's gutter runners with slingers. So the regular gutter runners, I'm gonna put them at A tier. They're actually very good, right? They're sort of like the Night Runner, except a step above them. Being at tier 3. The poison variant is the preferred one, but they're slightly more expensive than the other one. Actually, let me just confirm with them. Oh, hang on. The gutter runners with poison, they're actually tier 4, because look how there's that. But the regular gutter runners are only tier 3. So you actually need to build the pestilent knave in order to get this one here. Okay, well, That's good to know. I need to pay attention a bit more to those other things. Because I usually build that building, so I never really worry about it. And since with Skaven, I'm pretty much always at tier 5 because you use the food to boost settlement straight up. I don't notice a lot of the time when things have a secondary building that's required, because those buildings are usually just always built. Because basically when playing as Skaven, you're either tier 1 or you're tier 5. There's like no in between, because you just use food to just boost it straight away. Okay, so I'd still leave it as A tier. Even though this is a tier 4 unit, because the poison really does help in slowing enemy units down that are chasing you. And one of the other great things about Gutter Runners is that they've got this net ability, so that units that are fairly close, they slow down. So it allows you to catch up to routing units a lot quicker, but also run away from cavalry. So for example, if you've got a unit of Empire Knights chasing after you, with the net ability and the poison ability, you can reduce their speed down to like half, where your Gutter Runners are actually faster than their cavalry, and you can outshoot them. So very good unit. You can actually make a decent army with Gutter Runners. I really quite like them. And they stalk, which is really a really good ability for the Skaven, given the fact that you're going to be ambushing every other battle. And then we've got the Gutter Runners with slings, and the Gutter Runners slings poison. I'm going to put them at B tier, because they don't fire while moving. They are good. They got decent range. And when playing as Eshin, the extra armor piercing with these units is really good, but I think that their inability to fire while moving is the main thing that sets them down, because this one here can fire while it's being chased, where this one here can't. So that poison's like constantly being applied to units trying to catch up to them. So these ones here are definitely like the high tier Skaven sort of missile infantry. And then we've got sort of like weapons teams here. I don't know, maybe we should put a different category in the timeline for weapons teams. There's not that many of them, but I think we'll do that actually. So melee infantry, missile infantry, weapons teams, monsters, and then artillery, just to branch things out a bit more. Okay, now we've got the weapons teams. So which one should we do first? Actually, there are quite a few weapons teams. All right, let's talk about the flamethrower first. I don't use this unit very much. Let me see. Where does it come into play? It's a tier 2 unit, the Warp Fire Thrower. So you get them pretty early. They're very powerful. Like, their equivalent within the Dwarfen roster is the Iron Drakes, and in many ways, the Warp Fire Thrower can actually perform better than them, just because they actually have longer range. So I'm gonna put this unit here at. I don't personally use them, but you can get a lot of value out of them. I'm going to put them at A tier, because they can just obliterate enemy units really, really well, if you use them well. A bit finicky, just due to their lower range, but they are a very good unit. Alright, then you've got Deathglow Bombardiers, Globadiers here. No, sorry, they're Poison... Oh my god. Poison Wind Globadiers. They can also do a ton of damage, so I think I'm going to put them at A tier as well, because they're good. I wouldn't put them in Doomstack, but you've really got to watch out for single entities and keep an eye on this unit. But it can easily kill off hundreds of units if you're good with them. Then we've got the Deathglow Bombardiers, also an A tier unit. Really, really good at taking out armor-piercing dwarves. So good at it. Biggest problem is their low range, though. Like, these are some really decent weapons teams if you're on a bit of a budget. And then we've got the creme de la creme. We've got the Rattling Guns. Doomstack. The Jezzails. Doomstack. The Poison Wind Mortars. Oh, Doomstack. Now, the funny thing here is that these guys here need to be in a Doomstack as a team. I wouldn't spam in any army just one of these. I would put combinations of all three in an army. These are in my go-to weapons teams. These are excellent. The Rattling Gun is probably one of the highest damage dealing missile unit in the game. And when playing as Clan Scryer, being able to replenish your ammunition, so good. They slow enemy units down. Just probably my favorite unit in the entire game, the Rattling Gun. They got so much ammo, so much damage potential, and they're literally good against everything. There's no unit in the game that goes, oh yeah, Rattling Guns, that's no big deal for me. Even if it's got loads of physical resistance, everybody is concerned about Rattling Guns. Jezzails are excellent sharpshooters. They're really good at sniping enemy lords and bigger targets. This is usually my primary anti-large unit. Some people like to go with the Warp Lightning Cannon, but I actually prefer to go with Jezzails. Jezzails have lower range, but because they've got more entities shooting at any given time than the Warp Lightning Cannon, I find that they have way better DPS, and they're also way more accurate. And I find that these guys, though, their biggest problem is that they tend to be the first one to run out of ammunition, but they are an excellent unit, really high value, and they just do a lot for me. And they've got shields as well, so if enemy infantry do getting close to start shooting at them, they can block it fairly well. And then you've got the Poison Wind Mortars. Now, I usually only put one of these guys in my army, and that's not because they're crap, but because one is all I ever really need. These guys here just cause so much damage to enemy infantry, possibly one of the best anti-infantry units in the game. And just talking briefly about its Regiment of Renown variant, the Avalanche Mortars, that unit is possibly the best, hands down, Regiment of Renown unit in the game, bar none, because it slaughters infantry units. I get like 500 to 800 kills in every single battle with the Avalanche Mortars. They are just delicious. And the Poison Wind Mortars, they are so good in sieges, they're really good in field battles. The only situation they're not good at is dealing with lots of single entities, because they do damage over time, and damage over time is relative to how many units are in the actual unit. So using it against infantry units is way more effective than using it against a unit of rat ogres, if that's what you're going up against. So I definitely would put these as Doomstack status. These are some of the Skaven's best units. Okay, so that's the weapons team sorted. Now let's talk about monsters. Alright, Wolf Rats. Now, funnily enough, the green one is the regular variant, and the one with the green spit coming out of it but brown background is the poison. So both of these I would actually classify as trash, because they are just so low leadership on very hard battle difficulty, it's hard to get them to stay at all. However, if you have a Packmaster in your army, these make excellent summon units. So I wouldn't put them as standing units in my army, but I really do like them as a summon. Largely because, you know, it's not taking up a place in my army. So I just want to make that point known. I just think that these guys here, because of the leadership penalties on very hard battle difficulty, it's so hard to get these guys to stand and fight for any more than a couple of seconds. And I just find that they just can't get into combat a lot of the time, just because they rout so damn quickly. So that's why I'm going to put them as trash. You've got better choices in that. Get a Packmaster and summon them. That way, when they die, it's like, who cares? And they just act as a cannon fodder or whatever. It's totally fine. But putting them in standing army, don't recommend that at all. Then we got Rat Ogres, with their heads chopped off here. Okay, so the Rat Ogres. I think that Rat Ogres are trash. Yeah, just not a really good like monstrous infantry unit. You have better choices playing as the Skaven, even though monsters is kind of their forte. Oh, then they've also got War Machines. I'll need another section for that as well. Okay. Okay. So yeah, the Rat Ogres. I find that this is a very poorly performing unit. They're just not good. They don't dish out that much damage. They don't have as much leadership as other monstrous infantry in the game. Like, comparing them to, say, Minotaurs, these guys here just don't perform at all. And they just take damage way too quickly because they're too big. So I really don't like Rat Ogres that much. I virtually never recruit them. And whenever I see them in a battle, even when the enemy have them, I usually don't worry about them too much. So I think that they're complete trash. Alright, then let's talk about Brood Horrors. Doomstack. Definitely Doomstack. One of my favorite units in the game. Now, the thing about the Brood Horror, the Doom Horror, is it's not its stats that make it so good. They've actually got relatively low stats. What makes the Brood Horror so good is that it's possibly the fastest monster unit that's on the ground in the game. These guys here are hit and run machines, and that's so good for Skaven. You go in there, you hit them, and before they've had a chance to collect themselves, you just get out. They've also got a lot of mass, so they just push most units out of the way quite easily. They're armor piercing, they have regeneration, so in longer battles you can get a lot more use out of them than what the Auto Resolver might say. This is a fantastic unit if you're relatively micro inclined. You can get a lot out of this, even if you're not playing as Clan Molder, and you can boost them by a ton by having Packmasters nearby and just through technologies and stuff. Really, truly an excellent unit that you can spam. A little bit on the expensive side, but this is an excellent troop. Alright, then we've got the Mutant Rat Ogre, which I think is good, especially comparing it to the regular rat ogres, but definitely not doom stackable. So I'm gonna put it as A tier. Comparing it to brood horrors, at least, I just feel like their problem is their animation is okay in that they jump around a lot, making them difficult to hit, but they don't have as much mass, so they kind of get it's difficult to get them out of combat because they're just not that quick. So using them as hit and run can be a bit of a problem, and they also don't regenerate. So they can do very well, but nowhere near as well as what brood horrors can, just because that speed is such a huge advantage with brood horrors. Alright, and then we've got the Hell Pit Abomination, which you could argue is a Doomstack, but I'm actually going to put it as B tier because of their cost and also their size. Their size really works against them. These ones here can regenerate. You can. I have built armies full of Hell Pit Abominations before, and they tend not to perform that well. When I first got the Twisted and Twilight DLC, I had Throt with an army full of these, and in my first playthrough of it, and then in my second playthrough I went with Brood Horrors, and these just performed so much better than the Hell Pit Abominations, because these guys here get stuck. They do have they got good stats, but unfortunately the speed is what really sets them apart from the Brood Horrors. That speed is really useful, and also their size being so big, it just makes units so easy to hit them. Missile units can hit them with ease. They don't have a particularly lot of armor. It's just very easy for the enemy to isolate and kill them. So I'd put it under B tier there. Alright, now let's move on to War Machines. Okay. Doomflayers. Doomflayers are good. I'd put them as A tier. It's a good unit. Not the most amazing. They're really good as mounts. But because they're so small, they're very useful for holding the enemy back. If you need a frontline unit, so for example, if you're building a weapons team and you don't have access to Plague Priest just yet, rather than going Storm Vermin, my recommendation is check out the Doomflayers, because they'll hold reasonably well, because they're so small, it's very difficult for enemies to hit them. Missile units can't really get them, and they've actually got good combat stats, and you can kind of use them as chariots. They can to have some mass to a degree, but they're definitely not doom stackable. And then we've got the Doom Wheel. Doom Wheel's a bit finicky. I'd probably put it actually as C tier, because the Doom Wheel is larger than a Doomflayer. It's got a missile attack, but it's the same speed as a Doomflayer, but they tend to get caught more often just because it's a lot bigger. And while they're classified as an anti-infantry unit, I find that they just don't dish out that much damage in melee against infantry. Just because they're so big, they just get hit quite a lot. But they're okay. It's hard to get a lot of value out of them. You've got to really work quite hard to do anything. So and because they're a tier 5 unit as well, being quite expensive, I just think that for their price point, for their tier, the Doom Wheel's just not as good as what it should be. I think maybe if they were a bit faster, if they had a bit more mass, if they could just run over infantry a lot easier, that would definitely put them as a Doomstack. But they seem to be overbalancing the point where they just don't really do what you'd expect them to do, as like the Doom Wheel being like this terrifying unit. It's just not that scary. Alright, then we've got artillery over here. Plague Claw Catapult. Doomstack. This is arguably one of the best artillery units in the game. And you wouldn't think it, because it's like a basic catapult unit, but because the damage from this stuff does so much area of effect, you can get these guys to inflict hundreds of kills in every single battle. This is an excellent artillery piece, and I usually put it in with my weapons teams as my go-to artillery. Truly an excellent unit. Now, if you don't have the DLC for these, I would recommend getting more Plague Claw Catapults, which is why I'm putting them at this tier here. This is excellent. Now, the only problem they're going to have is, of course, dealing with single entity and things that are like large units. That being said, they're good against cavalry as well, because they just dish out so much damage. And the fact their magic attack doesn't really matter too much, even against dwarves, because their damage is so high that 25% magic resistance just isn't going to cut it to be able to block this damage. It also causes leadership problems, so getting the enemy units to rout. Just truly an excellent unit, and you can boost them with Warlock Engineers, same with all these guys except for the Brood Horrors. Getting them extra missile range, extra ammunition, damage damage per shot, reload time reduction. Really, really good unit. And they're excellent in sieges as well. And then we've got the Warp Lightning Cannon. Now, I don't personally use these that much, but I will put it as Doomstack because this is an excellent unit. The only reason I don't do it is just because I think that Jezzail's better. But if you want to get a whole bunch of Warp Lightning Cannons, this is a very dangerous unit. So, especially if you don't have the DLC. The main thing here is that this one here is anti-infantry, this one's anti-large. So, I usually go with this for anti-large, but if you don't have the DLC, you can go with Warp Lightning Cannons. Just have an army that's like 80% artillery, maybe like 60%. And these guys here are like all the units that you ever really need. You can actually run kind of like an artillery-only campaign with Skaven, because their artillery is just so fucking good. And that there is the Skaven unit roster. It honestly wasn't as lopsided as I thought it was. I was expecting as many trash units in here, but as I was going through it, I didn't... I thought I'd put fewer units under B or C. But anyway, that's my unit tier list for the Skaven roster. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this, whether you agree or disagree. More than open to changing my mind about it. But I think the Skaven has like just so many awesome playstyles. Truly one of my favorite races. If you haven't played the Skaven, give them a shot. Gravitate towards these units here, depending on your playstyle. And only really play with these units here if you really want to suffer in your campaigns, because you just have better choices. I mean, just about every single one of these units in here is a summon in some ways. Actually, yeah, just think about it. Yeah, Clan Rats can be summoned. The Storm Vermin can be summoned. Plague Monks can be summoned. These can be summoned, and only Throt can summon them. So yeah, this is basically like the summon section. You just don't need these fucking units. But these ones here, oh, it's so good. Anyway, that's the end of this one here. Appreciate you guys. Hope you're enjoying it. Let me know in the comments below which one you want me to do next. I think we'll do an old world race next. Probably leaning towards either the Empire or Dwarfs. So let me know which one of those two that you would like me to cover first. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Bye.